Welcome. It's me, Aaron the Artist. Thanks for sitting down with me again today for another art lesson. Today we're going to be having a look at how to apply shading to a drawing like this one. To start things off, we need a light source or a place where the light is coming from, and I'm going to say that it's coming from the top left. And having the light come from the top left like this is going to give us what's called Rembrandt lighting. Now, we're going to start by dividing the face into two halves, a light side and a shadow side. The side on the left is going to be in light and the side on the right will be in shadow. To get this correct, we start from the forehead and we go all the way down to the nose. Then we wrap around a little bit around the mouth and the lip, and then we come down again for the chin, and then we're going to wrap around the chin just a little bit, pointing towards the left-hand side. What we're doing is trying to wrap the shape of the shadow around the form of the face. This is the main shadow that falls on the right-hand side of the face with the light coming from the left. But you're also going to get a secondary shadow inside of that left-hand eye socket. This is because the eye sockets are holes in the face, and as the light comes in and hits the forehead, it will cast a shadow inside of the eye socket in the way just indicated. What makes Rembrandt lighting really pretty is that when you have the light coming from this direction, you quite often get light that just catches the cheek on the shadow side and helps it to stand out, giving form to that right side of the face. What we've done is we have drawn in all of the main shadows and highlights. Now I'm just going to shade all of those in using some hatching. The key thing with hatching, I've said this before, but the key is to always try to shade in that same direction unless you're building up layers. There is some awkwardness about applying lighting like this to anime faces because anime faces are exaggerated and simplified, and the proportions are a little bit strange in some ways. Because of that, lighting setups don't apply in a straightforward way like they would to a realistic face. And that means that quite often you end up having to improvise to make things fit the anime proportions. It's a fairly complex subject because what you're being asked to do when you draw anime is to draw in a very graphic, stylized, very shape-oriented way. And when you do shading, realistic shading, what you're being asked to do is draw in a very three-dimensional, very realistic way. And the two don't necessarily mesh together all that neatly. You have to draw lighting that is both realistic and graphically pleasing, and that can be difficult because not everything in real life is graphically pleasing. Sometimes shading that would be realistic would look gross, and so you have to find that happy middle between nice looking graphic shapes and believable lighting. I'll give you a few tips on how to do that in just a second. But I just want to point out what I'm doing here. I'm now shading in a slightly different direction in order to add some tone in the eyes. Usually when you have light that comes from the top, the eyelids are going to cast a shadow across the eyeballs in just the way that I have done here. It's often exaggerated a bit in anime to create a higher contrast effect. The shadow that you can see me putting in right now is a result of the light hitting the hair. As the light comes in and it hits the hair, it's going to cast a shadow down across the forehead. And that'll happen all the way down across the face as well. It'll also happen a little bit over on the right-hand side, but the effect will be much more diminished on that side. We're about to come again to this conflict between realistic shading and graphic shapes because realistic shading would have all sorts of different shadow shapes all over the face, whereas a graphically pleasing face would have a shadow shape where it was all lumped together as one clean, distinct shadow shape. You can see here I'm making a small alteration to the shading that I'd done before, which is not as realistic. You wouldn't have that shadow cast all the way across the eye socket like that necessarily. It would be much more subtle than that, and there would be highlights in there. However, for the sake of making a strong graphic shape, it looks better if that shadow in the eye socket isn't just sitting all apart by itself, but is instead connected to the shadow that comes down from the hair. I'm actually going to push the shadow that appears underneath the chin even further, and we're going to say that the head, being as big as it is, casts really quite a big old shadow all the way down across the neck and across the shoulders. That about does it for the face, but now we need to do the shading for the hair, and I'm not going to skip out on that step. We know that the light is coming from the left, so the shadows on the right hand side are going to be generally deeper and more common than the shadows on the left. Now this is going to be a gradual approach of me trialing and erroring different shapes. What we want essentially are two things. One, we want a nice graphic shape to form out of the shadows, and two, we want there to be more shadow on that right hand side than there is on the left. Now the exact shapes that takes doesn't exactly matter and is kind of up to the artist's personal preference, but that's the kind of thing that you want. And again, just like with the face, we want to try and keep all of the shadow shapes connected to one another. This area that you see here right by the parting is going to be in shadow because the light is going to come up and it's going to hit the hair on that top left hand side, and that's going to cast a shadow as the hair starts to move back down into the scalp. Other than that, we're really going to be pretty minimal with the shading on the left hand side, and where we do put it in, it's going to be near the bottom of the hair strands following our light source. What we will need to do, however, is shade in the back section of the hair. The hair behind the head is almost always in shadow because all of the light gets blocked by one, the hair in front of the face, and two, by the skull itself. So you always get some pretty dark shading back there, especially as you get nearer to the skull. In fact, it's so dark back there that we're going to need to build up several different layers of hatching to create the effect. Where would the highlights go in a drawing like this one? Well, they would go up in the top left, like this. A few of them might spill over to the right side, but again, significantly fewer than there are on the left. However, because we've left the hair the same color as the page, we're just going to outline the highlights and not necessarily put them in with tone. That just about finishes all of the shading for this character. I'm just going to go back in with the black colored pencil just to tighten up some areas and to bring back out some things that have been lost as we started to add more and more shading. But that does just about finish everything. I hope that you were able to learn a thing or two about how to add shading to faces with me today. If you want to see any of my personal art, you can see that over on YouTube Shorts. Till next time, have a nice day, folks.